Deep in the Oregon wilderness, a church stands where no church should be. For 30 years, Ranger Samuel Dean walked these forests, tracking lost hikers and cataloging every stream and hollow. But nothing prepared him for what he found that foggy autumn morning. A weathered wooden sanctuary consumed by vines, its steeple pointing skyward like an accusing finger. Inside, dust motes danced in stained glass light across empty pews. Only a single candle burned at the altar, its flame impossibly steady. Below, hidden in the shadowed crypt, hundreds of yellowed letters bore desperate confessions and one recurring warning: he still walks among us. Why was Samuel's family name carved into the ancient stone beneath the altar? Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The afternoon sun cut through pine branches as Samuel Dean adjusted his worn ranger hat. 58 years had etched deep lines around his eyes, weathered by decades of mountain winters and summer droughts. His office, little more than a wooden desk and 2 filing cabinets, sat nestled in the corner of Oak Ridge Ranger Station. The walls adorned with topographical maps he'd annotated by hand over 30 years of service. Samuel ran his fingers along the tattered edges of his grandfather's compass, its brass case polished by 3 generations of Dean men who'd walked these woods. Unlike the GPS units the younger rangers relied on, this compass had never lost its way, never needed batteries, never failed him in the backcountry. Another missing hiker? Ruth Carver asked, leaning against his doorframe. At 62, Ruth had served as the park's historian longer than anyone could remember. Her silver hair was always pulled back in a practical braid, her eyes sharp behind reading glasses that hung from a beaded chain. Samuel nodded, pushing a missing person report across his desk. College student, Ellie Palmer, 27. Experienced hiker, according to her friends. 3 days overdue. Ruth studied the photo. Pretty girl. Shame when they go off trail. Who says she went off trail? Samuel gathered his gear, methodical in his preparation. They always do, especially in the Eastern Quadrant. Ruth's voice lowered slightly. You know, that area has always been strange, Samuel snorted. He had no patience for Ruth's local legends and ghost stories. It's just dense forest. People lose their bearings. Those old settlement stories are just stories, Samuel interrupted, checking his radio. I've covered every inch of this forest. If there was anything out there worth gossiping about, I'd have found it decades ago, Ruth shrugged. Your father believed them. The mention of his father made Samuel's movements stiffen. Dad believed a lot of things. Didn't make them true. An uncomfortable silence settled between them. Ruth knew better than to push further when Samuel's jaw set like that. The complicated relationship between Samuel and his late father remained an unspoken wound around the station. Michael called the main office earlier, Ruth said, changing tactics. Said he couldn't reach you on your cell. Samuel checked his watch, avoiding her gaze. Reception's spotty up here. He's your son, Samuel. Only family you've got left since Caroline. I know who he is. Samuel zipped his pack with unnecessary force. Did he leave a message? Just that he's in Portland for a conference. Thought he might drive out. Samuel nodded, but offered nothing more. 3 years had passed since he'd seen Michael. Their last conversation had devolved into familiar territory. Michael insisting Samuel retire, sell the cabin, move closer to the city. Samuel refusing to leave the only place that still connected him to Caroline. Outside the station window, fog rolled in unusually early, blanketing the distant peaks in mist. A storm was brewing, and not just the meteorological kind. Samuel shouldered his pack, the weight familiar against his spine. I'll take the Eastern Quadrant. Tell Davis and Martinez to cover the ridge trail and the waterfall paths. If I'm not back by sundown, I'll radio in from the emergency shelter on Hollow Ridge. You always take the Eastern Quadrant, Ruth noted. Even the new rangers have noticed. Samuel paused at the door. It's where people get lost the most. Or maybe something out there keeps calling you back, Ruth said quietly. Samuel didn't dignify that with a response. As he stepped outside, the air felt heavy, charged with an electricity that had nothing to do with lightning. His hand unconsciously moved to the compass in his pocket, seeking its familiar weight. His cabin stood a quarter-mile from the station, a modest structure of timber and stone he'd built with his own hands after Caroline died. Inside, more maps covered the walls, each marked with annotations from decades of ranger patrols. On his bedside table sat a photo of Caroline, smiling from the summit of Mount Hood, and beside it, a picture of Michael's college graduation, the last time they'd all been together before her diagnosis. Samuel changed into his field gear with practiced efficiency. As he laced his boots, he glanced at his phone. 3 missed calls from Michael. His thumb hovered over the callback button before he placed the phone in his drawer. Whatever his son wanted would have to wait. There was a lost hiker out there and storm clouds gathering. Some things took precedence over complicated family dynamics. What Samuel didn't know, what he couldn't possibly understand yet, was that the Eastern Quadrant had been waiting for him. And today, it would finally reveal why. Morning mist clung to the forest floor as Samuel's boots crunched along the eastern trail. He'd started at first light, methodical in his search pattern as always. The radio at his hip crackled occasionally with updates from Davis and Martinez, who were covering the more popular hiking routes. Any sign near the falls? Samuel asked, pausing to mark his map. Negative, Martinez replied, voice breaking through static. Talked to some campers who saw her 3 days ago heading east. Said she was asking about old logging roads, Samuel frowned. The Eastern Quadrant contained a maze of abandoned logging roads, most reclaimed by nature decades ago. Strange that an experienced hiker would venture there without telling anyone. He pulled out Ellie Palmer's torn backpack strap from his pocket, found yesterday near the trailhead. The clean cut through the heavy-duty nylon troubled him. This wasn't animal damage or normal wear. The precision suggested a knife. The forest around him felt different today. After 30 years, Samuel knew these woods like he knew his own reflection, yet something felt off. The birds were too quiet, the air too still. Even the wind seemed to hold its breath. By midday, Samuel had pushed deeper into the Eastern Quadrant than any search party had gone in years. His radio signal weakened, the occasional bursts of communication now mostly static. The fog hadn't burned off as it should have, instead thickening until visibility dropped to mere yards. Samuel checked his compass, then stopped cold. The needle spun lazily, refusing to settle on north. He tapped the glass, a flicker of unease crossing his weathered face. In 3 decades, his grandfather's compass had never failed. A twig snapped somewhere to his left. Samuel turned sharply, hand instinctively moving to his sidearm. Nothing, just more fog and silent trees. "Hello?" he called. "Ranger Service." "Ellie Palmer?" His voice sounded muffled, as if the fog itself swallowed his words. That's when he spotted it, a scrap of bright fabric caught on a thorny bush. Samuel approached carefully, removing a small camera from his pack to document the scene before touching anything. The fabric matched the description of Ellie's red hiking jacket. Nearby, partial boot prints indicated someone had left the main trail, heading toward a slope that shouldn't exist according to his map. Samuel checked his GPS unit. No signal. He photographed the boot prints and took measurements. Women's size 8 Morel hiking boots, matching Ellie's. The tracks were only a day old at most, contradicting reports she'd been missing for 3 days. Following the trail, Samuel discovered more disturbing evidence, a torn page from a journal, the handwriting frantic and uneven. Most words were illegible, smudged by moisture, but a few phrases stood out, being followed and wrong turn and not alone. Samuel's training battled with his growing discomfort. The rational part of his mind catalogued possibilities. Ellie could have been injured, might be delirious from exposure, perhaps had encountered a drifter in the woods. But 30 years of instinct told him something else entirely, something he wasn't ready to name. The fog swirled and for a moment seemed to take shape, like fingers reaching toward him before dissipating. Samuel shook his head. Tricks of light and fatigue, nothing more. By late afternoon, Samuel had followed the trail to a ridge that shouldn't have existed. According to his map, this area was a gentle slope leading to a creek. Instead, he faced a steep ravine cutting through the landscape like an ancient scar. At the bottom of the ravine, a narrow game trail wound between towering pines. The trees here were old, older than any in this part of the forest should be. Their massive trunks and towering canopy created a cathedral-like space beneath. Where light filtered through in dusty beams, Samuel descended carefully, noting how the fog seemed to part around this particular grove, as if reluctant to enter the space. The silence was complete now, no birds, no insects, not even the whisper of wind through needles. That's when he found Ellie's journal, its leather cover stained with what looked distressingly like blood. Samuel opened it with gloved hands, a chill running through him as he read the final entry, dated just yesterday. I found it. The church is real. All the stories were true. If I don't make it back, tell them it wasn't just legend. And whatever happens, don't go inside after dark. Samuel looked up sharply as the fog shifted. Through a momentary clearing, he glimpsed something impossible in the distance. A weathered wooden steeple, rising above the ancient trees where nothing man-made should stand. Samuel stood motionless, his breath visible in the suddenly chilled air. The steeple had appeared and vanished like a mirage, but he wasn't prone to hallucinations. 30 years in these woods had taught him to trust his eyes. This makes no sense, he muttered, checking his map once more. No structures were marked in this area, not even ruins or historical sites. Ruth's words echoed in his mind, those old settlement stories. Moving forward cautiously, Samuel felt the weight of watchful silence press around him. The path beneath his feet gradually transformed from wild forest trail to something more deliberate. Flat stones, occasionally peeking through decades of accumulated soil and moss. As the fog parted again, Samuel froze. The church stood before him, a weathered wooden structure with a crooked steeple that seemed to defy gravity. Vines embraced the walls like gnarled fingers, while moss covered much of the roof. The architecture suggested late 1800s construction, reminiscent of frontier churches he'd seen restored in historical parks. Except this was no restoration. "Impossible," Samuel whispered, his ranger training battling with what his eyes reported. The forest here was at least a century old. For this church to exist, it would have had to be built before the trees grew, yet no records mentioned any settlement in this area. His radio emitted a burst of static, making him jump. When he tried to respond, only a high-pitched whine answered. Cell phone, no signal. GPS, still offline. Samuel was effectively cut off from communication. Approaching the church, Samuel noticed unusual details. The cross atop the steeple was inverted, weather or time having twisted it from its original position. The windows were intact but darkened, not broken as one might expect in an abandoned structure. Most disturbing was the front door, slightly ajar as if recently used. "Ellie?" Samuel called, his voice sounding flat in the dense air. "Forest Service? If you're in there, call out." Only silence answered. Samuel's hand closed around the silver pocket knife in his jacket, a gift from Caroline on their 20th anniversary, engraved with their initials. He'd carried it on every patrol since her passing. Somehow its familiar weight brought comfort now. The church's weathered steps creaked beneath his boots. Following procedure, Samuel documented everything with his camera. The unusual architecture, the impossible location, the door's condition. If he made it back, Ruth would have a field day with this discovery. On the threshold, Samuel hesitated. Ellie's journal warning echoed in his mind. Don't go inside after dark. The sun was already lowering, painting the fog with amber hues. He had perhaps an hour of daylight left. Professional obligation won out over growing unease. If Ellie was injured inside, every minute mattered. The door opened with surprising ease, no scraping or resistance. Samuel's flashlight beam cut through the dusty interior, revealing worn wooden pews, arranged in neat rows facing a simple altar. The expected musty scent of abandonment was present, but beneath it lay something else, a faint trace of beeswax and incense, as if service had been held recently. Dust motes danced in the beams of light, filtering through stained glass windows. The images depicted were unlike any church windows Samuel had seen: dark forests, solitary figures, and in one, what appeared to be a tall, elongated shadow standing among trees. "Hello," Samuel called again, moving slowly up the central aisle. "Anyone here?" His flashlight beam caught something metallic in the front pew. Samuel approached cautiously, finding an antique silver pendant on a tarnished chain. The pendant was open, revealing a faded photograph inside, a solemn-faced man in clerical clothing standing before this very church. The date etched on the back, 1879. As Samuel examined it, the church door behind him closed with a decisive thud. He spun around, heart racing, eyes scanning for movement. Nothing moved in the shadows. The door must have swung shut on its own, an air current perhaps. When Samuel tried the door, however, it wouldn't budge. Not locked, but as if an immense weight pressed against it from outside. All windows were too high or too narrow for exit. The sun dipped lower, its fading light casting long shadows through the stained glass. As darkness crept into the corners of the church, Samuel noticed something impossible at the altar: a single candle, burning steadily despite the dusty abandonment surrounding it. And beneath the altar, partially visible from his angle, was what appeared to be a trapdoor, its brass handle gleaming as if recently polished. The single candle flickered as Samuel approached the altar, casting animated shadows across the weathered wood. His ranger training kept him methodical despite mounting unease. Document everything. Maintain awareness, find an exit strategy. Samuel photographed the burning candle, noting its white wax showed no signs of melting despite the steady flame. He tried extinguishing it, first by blowing gently, then more forcefully. The flame wavered but remained stubbornly lit. "What is this place?" he whispered, his voice unnaturally loud in the silence. The trapdoor beneath the altar drew his attention. Kneeling, Samuel examined the ornate brass handle without touching it. Intricate symbols were etched around its edges, not religious iconography he recognized, but something older, more primal. "First things first," he muttered, forcing himself to turn away from the trapdoor. Protocol dictated a thorough search for the missing hiker before investigating historical curiosities. Samuel moved systematically through the church, documenting each section. Behind the pulpit, he discovered a narrow door leading to what must have been the pastor's study. Unlike the dusty main sanctuary, this room showed signs of recent use: chair positions disturbed, books not entirely aligned on shelves. The leather-bound Bible on the desk captured Samuel's attention immediately. Unlike anything he'd seen in modern churches, this massive tome was bound in dark leather with metal clasps and corner pieces. Samuel opened it carefully, finding the expected scripture but with disturbing differences. Certain passages were altered with references to the Watcher in the Woods and the Confessor appearing throughout. He photographed several pages, then continued his investigation. A wooden filing cabinet yielded the church's baptismal record. The names within sent a chill through Samuel. Among the earliest entries was Theodore Dean, 1881, his great-grandfather. Samuel's hands trembled slightly as he turned the brittle pages. More Dean family names appeared throughout decades of records, contradicting everything he knew about his family history. His father had never mentioned any connection to a church, let alone one hidden deep in these woods. A final name in the record struck him like a physical blow. Samuel Dean was listed as baptized in 1965, his own birth year. "That's impossible," Samuel whispered, backing away from the record book. His elbow knocked against a shelf, dislodging a small wooden box that clattered to the floor. Inside lay a strange object, a bronze astrolabe, its face engraved with unfamiliar celestial patterns and symbols matching those around the trapdoor handle. As Samuel lifted the astrolabe, its pointers began rotating on their own, aligning into a configuration that matched the current position of the sun, now barely visible through the window as twilight approached. The fading daylight lent urgency to his search. Samuel returned to the main sanctuary, calling Ellie's name again. His flashlight beam caught something unexpected, a modern hiking boot, partially visible beneath the last pew. Samuel rushed to investigate, finding Ellie Palmer's backpack concealed there. Inside were her credentials, water bottle, and a digital camera. He powered on the camera, flipping through recent images. Dozens of photos of the church inside and out, many focusing on the stained glass windows and the symbols around the altar. The final images chilled him, a series of blurred shots taken in apparent panic, showing a tall, indistinct figure standing among the pews. In the last photo, the figure seemed to be looking directly at the camera, its features obscured by shadow, except for eyes that reflected light like an animal's. A soft thud from beneath the floor made Samuel freeze. It came again, a deliberate sound, like knuckles rapping on wood. Someone or something was beneath the church. "Ellie?" Samuel called, moving toward the altar and the trapdoor. The candle flame suddenly elongated, stretching impossibly upward before resuming its normal shape. The knocking came again, more insistent. With no other options, Samuel approached the trapdoor. The astrolabe in his pocket grew warm, almost hot against his thigh. When he placed it on the altar, its pointers spun rapidly before settling into a new pattern. The church bells above began to toll, though no wind or human hand moved them. 6 doleful rings echoed through the sanctuary, marking not the hour but something else, something coming. In the deepening shadows of the church, Samuel made his decision. He grasped the brass handle of the trapdoor and pulled. The trapdoor opened with a reluctant groan, releasing the scent of cold stone and old paper. Samuel's flashlight beam disappeared into darkness below, revealing a narrow stone staircase spiraling downward. Dust particles swirled in the light, dancing like tiny constellations. "Ellie?" Samuel called down. His voice echoed strangely, returning distorted, as if traveling a greater distance than possible. No answer came, but the knocking had stopped. Samuel marked his position on his map, a professional habit now more comfort than practical, before beginning his descent. Each step felt unnaturally cold beneath his boots. The staircase wound deeper than the church's modest size should allow. Samuel counted 42 steps before reaching the bottom, emerging into what could only be described as a crypt. His flashlight revealed stone walls lined with alcoves, each containing stacks of yellowed papers rather than the expected remains. "What is this place?" Samuel whispered, approaching the nearest alcove. The papers were letters, hundreds of them, their edges brittle with age. Samuel carefully extracted one dated 1889, its spidery handwriting still legible. "I confessed to the sin of doubt. I denied the watcher, questioned its presence. For 3 nights it stood outside my cabin. On the 4th night it took my son. I've come to the church to beg forgiveness. I will serve as needed if only my boy is returned. I believe now. I believe." Samuel's hand trembled as he returned the letter. He selected another from a different alcove, this one from 1932, "The Dreams Won't Stop. It shows me things, futures that cannot be. I've done as instructed, brought others to the clearing, spoken the words. Still it demands more. The pastor says confession brings peace, but I've confessed everything. What more can it want? The symbols appear on my walls each night, though I paint over them each morning. It knows I'm writing this. It watches even now." A sound behind him made Samuel turn sharply, flashlight beam cutting through darkness. Nothing visible, yet the sense of being observed intensified. The air felt heavier here, pressing against his skin like a physical presence. Moving deeper into the crypt, Samuel discovered a circular chamber at its center. Stone pillars carved with the same symbols from the trapdoor handle supported a domed ceiling. At the chamber's heart stood a simple stone pedestal, upon which rested an ornate iron box. Samuel approached cautiously. Unlike everything else in the crypt, the box showed no dust or age. Its black metal gleamed as if recently polished, adorned with silver inlay forming complex geometric patterns. No obvious lock or hinge was visible. As his flashlight played across the box, Samuel noticed words etched into the pedestal beneath, "For the Guardian. When the Dean blood returns." The family connection he'd been denying now became impossible to ignore. Whatever this church was, whatever purpose it served, his family, his blood, was intrinsically linked to it. Samuel's fingers hovered over the box. Professional caution warred with a pull he couldn't explain, a certainty that this object was meant for him specifically. Before he could decide, a whisper emerged from the darkness behind him. "You came." Samuel spun, heart hammering. His flashlight beam caught nothing but stone walls. "Who's there?" he demanded, voice steadier than he felt. "Samuel Dean." The whisper seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere. "The Guardian returns." "Show yourself," Samuel commanded, falling back on authority when sense failed. Silence answered, but as Samuel turned back to the pedestal, the iron box had opened. Inside lay a single item, an ornate skeleton key crafted from what appeared to be bone, its handle carved with symbols matching those throughout the church. The moment Samuel's eyes fell upon it, the whispers returned. Now a chorus of overlapping voices. "Take it. It's yours by right. The door must be locked again. He walks among us." Samuel's radio crackled to life unexpectedly. Martinez's voice breaking through static. "Dean, do you copy? Night's falling. Return to base," before cutting out completely. The interruption broke whatever spell held Samuel transfixed. He quickly photographed the key without touching it, then continued documenting the chamber. As his flashlight swept the walls, he discovered an alcove different from the others. A sealed stone vault with a keyhole at its center. Carved into the vault door was a name, Dean. Samuel stepped closer, flashlight revealing more text beneath the name. "The bloodline that binds must guard the door. What was opened must be closed. What was invited must be contained." The whispers grew more urgent, pressing against his ears like a physical force. Behind him, something shifted in the darkness, a presence moving among the shadows, growing more substantial as the last light of day faded from the world above. Samuel backed away from the vault, keeping his flashlight trained on the Dean name carved in stone. Professional instinct battled with a primal urge to flee. The whispers had ceased, but the silence felt expectant, as if the darkness itself awaited his decision. "This is insane," he muttered, forcing rational thought. There has to be an explanation. He needed answers before touching anything else in this impossible place. The bone key remained in its box, and Samuel left it there, turning instead to methodically photograph each alcove of confession letters. In the furthest corner of the crypt, partially concealed behind a stone pillar, Samuel discovered a small wooden cabinet. Unlike the confessional alcoves, this appeared to be storage for church records. Inside were leather folios organized by date, the earliest from 1878. Samuel selected this volume, its binding cracked with age. The first page bore a title in formal script, Chronicle of the Church of the Watcher, established 1878 by Theodore Dean and the Faithful. His great-grandfather hadn't just attended this church, he'd founded it. Samuel's hands trembled slightly as he turned brittle pages. The chronicle detailed the church's construction, describing how Theodore Dean had led a group of 7 families to this remote location after receiving visions of the Watcher's call. The narrative grew increasingly disturbing. Theodore wrote of a presence in the woods, ancient and powerful, that offered protection and prosperity in exchange for worship and confession. The settlers had made a pact, building the church as both temple and prison for an entity they only partially understood. A folded paper slipped from between the pages, a daguerreotype photograph, remarkably preserved. It showed 8 men standing before the newly built church. In the center stood a bearded man in his 30s, the resemblance to Samuel unmistakable despite the century between them. Theodore Dean, but what sent a chill through Samuel was the tall, blurred figure standing in the church doorway behind the men. While the settlers stood perfectly still for the long exposure, This figure appeared in motion, its features indistinct except for unnaturally elongated limbs. Samuel turned the photo over. Written in faded ink, "The Watcher blesses our covenant." 1878. Returning to the Chronicle, Samuel found entries detailing the blessings bestowed upon the Dean family: prosperity, longevity, protection from illness. But these gifts came with obligations. Each generation of deans was required to provide a guardian for the church, someone to maintain the boundaries between the Watcher and the wider world. The final pages revealed what happened when this covenant was broken. In 1965, the year of Samuel's birth, his grandfather had died without appointing a successor. His father, David Dean, had refused the role, fleeing with his wife and infant son, rather than taking up the mantle of guardian. The Chronicle ended with a warning. The Watcher does not release what belongs to it. The Dean blood is bound to this place. What was begun must be maintained. The door weakens. Samuel closed the book, mind racing. His father had never spoken of any of this. The few childhood memories Samuel had of him featured a man perpetually looking over his shoulder, moving the family frequently, warning young Samuel never to wander in forests alone. Now it made terrible sense. His father had been running from this legacy, this obligation. But if the Chronicle spoke truth, he hadn't escaped. None of them had. Movement flickered at the edge of Samuel's vision. He spun, flashlight beam cutting through darkness, catching nothing but stone walls. Yet the sense of being watched intensified. A soft shuffling came from the chamber entrance. Samuel turned to find the stairway had vanished, replaced by solid stone. The only exit now was a narrow archway leading deeper into the earth. "No," Samuel said firmly, as if addressing the church itself. "I'm not playing this game." He approached the wall where the stairs had been, examining it carefully. His fingers found a small depression, and within it a rusted iron lever. Samuel pulled it without hesitation. The stone rumbled, revealing not the expected staircase, but a different passage. At its end glowed faint light, not the harsh beam of a flashlight, but the warm flicker of candlelight. "Ellie?" Samuel called, hope briefly overriding caution. No answer came, but the light beckoned. The whispers returned, barely audible. "Follow. The guardian must see. The truth waits. He walks among us." Samuel checked his watch, 7:35 p.m. The search teams would be looking for him now. But in this place, buried beneath impossible architecture, standard rescue protocols meant nothing. His only path lay forward toward whatever revelation awaited. Taking a deep breath, Samuel entered the new passage, the Chronicle's final warning echoing in his mind. The door weakens. The narrow passage curved gently downward, its stone walls growing older, rougher, as Samuel progressed. The flickering light ahead cast his shadow behind him, impossibly tall and distorted against the uneven surface. Each step felt heavier than the last, as if the air itself thickened around him. Samuel maintained a running commentary on his recorder, a practice that normally organized his thoughts during search operations. Now it served as an anchor to rationality, continuing through underground passage, architecture inconsistent with known historical settlements in region. Evidence suggests connection to Dean family dating to 1878. Searching for missing hiker, Ellie Palmer, who appears to have discovered the site previously. His voice echoed strangely, returning with subtle variations, as if someone mimicked his words just out of sync. Samuel ignored it, focusing on the light ahead. The passage opened into a circular chamber, different from the crypt above. Where the crypt had been all stone and shadow, this space glowed with soft amber light from dozens of candles placed in wall niches. At the chamber's center stood a pedestal supporting a large, ornate brass lantern, unlike any Samuel had seen before. The lantern's glass panels were tinted in different colors, casting prismatic patterns across the room. Most striking were the intricate cutouts in its metal frame, creating shadows that danced across the walls, not random patterns, but distinct scenes. Samuel approached cautiously. As he circled the lantern, the shadow scenes shifted like primitive animation. They depicted figures in period clothing entering a church, confessing to a robed figure, and then the robed figure growing impossibly tall, its limbs elongating as it reached toward them. "What is this?" Samuel whispered. His voice triggered a change. The lantern began to rotate slowly on its base, though no breeze or mechanism was visible. The shadow play transformed, now showing a family fleeing from the elongated figure. A child was carried in a woman's arms. With a chill, Samuel recognized his parents and himself as an infant. The shadows continued their story, the family constantly moving, always looking back. Then the father alone, returning to the church, confronting the entity. The shadow scene ended with the father figure kneeling, head bowed before the towering presence. "Dad came back," Samuel murmured, pieces falling into place. "He tried to end it." The lantern rotated faster, shadows blurring across stone walls. When they settled again, they showed a car crash. A woman thrown through windshield glass. Samuel stepped back sharply. Carolyn. His wife's death had been ruled an accident, black ice on a mountain road, a guardrail that failed. But the shadow play suggested something else, a tall figure standing in the road before her car, arms outstretched. No. Samuel's voice hardened. That's not what happened. But doubt crept in, cold and insidious. Caroline's accident had occurred just miles from here, on a clear night with no ice. The investigators had never explained why her car had swerved so violently. The lantern's rotation slowed, settling on a new scene, a ranger discovering a church in the woods. Samuel watched his own shadow self enter the building, descend into the crypt, and finally stand before this very lantern. The shadow play had caught up to the present, then it continued, showing what had not yet come to pass. Samuel taking up the bone key, approaching the vault. A door opening to darkness. "That's enough," Samuel said firmly, reaching for the lantern. As his fingers touched the brass, a searing cold burned through his gloves. The lantern flared brilliantly, its colored panels intensifying until they hurt to look at. The shadows on the wall transformed once more, no longer flat silhouettes but gaining depth and substance. They peeled away from the stone, wisps of darkness coalescing into three-dimensional forms that moved independently of their light source. Shadow figures circled Samuel, their features indistinct except for eyes that reflected the lantern's light like animals caught in headlights. "Guardian," they whispered in unison, voices dry as autumn leaves. The Dean blood returns. Samuel backed away, drawing his knife, a futile gesture against entities made of darkness. "What do you want from me?" "What was always yours to give," the shadows replied. "Service, confession, guardianship. I'm not part of this," Samuel insisted. "I'm just looking for a missing hiker." The shadows laughed, a sound like wind through dead branches. "She sought the truth as you do now. The Watcher called her. It calls all who are marked." One shadow approached, more substantial than the others. It reached towards Samuel with elongated fingers, stopping just short of touching him. "Night has fallen," it said, voice clearer, almost familiar. The door weakens. "He walks among us soon." The lantern suddenly extinguished, plunging the chamber into absolute darkness. In the silence that followed, Samuel heard steady footsteps approaching from somewhere beyond the chamber walls. Heavy, deliberate steps that belonged to something far larger than any human. Darkness enveloped Samuel completely, the heavy footsteps growing louder. His training took over. Remain still, control breathing, assess options. He fumbled for his flashlight, but it refused to activate. No technology seemed to function properly in this place. A match flared nearby, illuminating a face Samuel hadn't seen in nearly 3 decades. "Hello." "Son," said the man, his weathered features hauntingly familiar despite the passage of time. "You've finally come home." Samuel stared in disbelief. "Dad, that's impossible. You died 20 years ago." David Dean's smile didn't reach his eyes as he lit a candle. "Death works differently in this place. Nothing truly ends here." He gestured toward a small alcove. "We need to talk before it finds us." Against all rational judgment, Samuel followed. The alcove contained 2 wooden chairs and a small table, like a confessional without the divider. David sat, placing the candle between them. "You're not real," Samuel said flatly. "You're some manifestation of this place, playing on my memories." David reached into his jacket, retrieving a small leather notebook with the Forest Service emblem embossed on its cover. "I kept this during my time as a ranger, before you were born. Before I learned what our family truly was." Samuel recognized it immediately, his father's service journal, lost after his death. He'd searched for it among his father's possessions, hoping to understand the man who'd been absent for much of his childhood. "May I?" Samuel asked, reaching for it. The journal felt physically real in his hands, the leather worn smooth at the corners, the pages yellowed with age. Samuel opened it carefully, finding his father's familiar handwriting filling each page. Observations of wildlife, weather patterns, trail conditions. But as he flipped through, the entries changed. Midway through the journal, the professional observations gave way to increasingly disturbed personal notes. March 12th, 1964. Dreams again. The church in the woods. The voices calling me back. I've moved us 3 times in 2 years, but it always finds me. April 18th, 1964. Margaret is pregnant. I can't let this curse touch my child. There must be a way to end the covenant. Samuel looked up sharply. You knew? All those years we moved around, you knew about this place. David's expression was heavy with regret. The Dean family has been bound to the Watcher for generations. When my father died without naming a new guardian, the responsibility fell to me. I refused it. Ran with your mother when we learned she was carrying you. He reached across the table, tapping the journal. Keep reading. Samuel turned the page, finding entries from after his birth, February 2nd, 1966. It found us again. I saw it standing over Samuel's crib last night. The mark appeared on his shoulder this morning. 3 vertical lines, just like mine, just like my father's. The covenant cannot be escaped. Samuel's hand instinctively went to his shoulder, where 3 pale scars had always been. His mother had told him they were from a childhood accident he couldn't remember. What is the Watcher? Samuel demanded. What does it want? It was here before the settlers, before any humans stepped foot in these woods. Something ancient that found it could feed on human confession, human guilt. David's voice dropped lower. Theodore Dean didn't just find it. He made a deal with it. Protection and prosperity for the family in exchange for service as its guardian. Keeping it bound to this place, but providing it with souls burdened by secrets. The footsteps had stopped, but presence pressed against the alcove entrance, listening. Why did you come back? Samuel asked. Your journal said you ran. David's eyes reflected the candlelight, haunted. It took your mother. Made it look like pneumonia, but I knew. I came back, offered myself in exchange for leaving you untouched. He looked away. It accepted on one condition, that you would eventually take my place when called. And Caroline's accident, a warning. You were getting too old, the covenant unfulfilled. It's patient, but not endlessly so. Samuel closed the journal, anger rising. So this entity killed my wife to force me here. And what about Ellie Palmer? Is she just collateral damage in this family nightmare? She came searching for answers about her own family. The Palmers were among the original 7 families. The Watcher calls to all bloodlines bound to it. David leaned forward urgently. She's alive, Samuel, in the inner sanctum, but not for long if the binding fails completely. The candle flickered violently, shadows elongating across David's face, briefly transforming his features into something inhuman before settling again. You're not my father, Samuel said, sudden certainty cutting through confusion. Whatever you are, you're using his image, his memories. The thing wearing David Dean's face smiled sadly. Does it matter? The information is true. The choice before you is real. Take up the guardianship, or watch as the Watcher breaks free completely. Outside the alcove, the footsteps resumed, circling closer. Samuel backed away from the thing wearing his father's face. The temperature in the alcove plummeted, his breath visible in suddenly frigid air. I need to find Ellie Palmer, he stated firmly, focusing on his original mission. Whatever family legacy or supernatural entity awaited, a living person needed help. "The inner sanctum lies beyond the sealed vault," the false David replied, its form wavering slightly. "Only the Guardian can open it. Only Dean Blood can turn the key." The entity gestured toward the chamber outside, where the footsteps had fallen silent. He grows impatient. The barrier thins. Samuel weighed his options. Trust nothing, but use whatever information might help. "Show me the way to the inner sanctum." The chamber outside had transformed during their conversation. What had been a simple circular room was now a long corridor lined with church pews. At the far end stood an ornate altar, and beyond it, the sealed stone vault door he'd seen earlier. Now transported from the crypt above, Samuel moved cautiously down the central aisle, senses alert for deception. On the final pew to his right, something caught his eye. A simple wooden rosary, its beads worn smooth from handling. He picked it up carefully. The crucifix had been replaced with a small silver compass, its needle spinning continuously rather than pointing north. Turning the object over, Samuel found initials carved into the wood. "E.P. Ellie Palmer," he murmured. The moment he spoke her name, the rosary grew warm in his palm. The compass needle stabilized, pointing decisively toward the vault door. Samuel followed its direction, approaching the altar. The bone key he'd left behind in the crypt now waited on the stone surface, as if the church itself had rearranged its contents to guide him forward. The false David had vanished, but its voice lingered. "The choice remains yours, Guardian. Open the door. Face what waits." The rosary pulsed with gentle warmth, the compass still indicating the vault. Samuel made his decision. He would find Ellie first, then deal with whatever legacy or entity claimed him. He took the key and approached the vault door, examining the intricate lock mechanism. The keyhole was surrounded by concentric rings of symbols, matching those on the key itself. Samuel inserted it carefully, feeling resistance until he aligned the patterns. With a decisive turn, the mechanism engaged. Stone grated against stone as the vault door swung open, revealing not a room, but a spiraling staircase leading deeper. The rosary compass pulled stronger now, the beads almost hot against his skin. Samuel descended, counting steps out of habit. At 49, the staircase opened into a small, chapel-like space. Unlike the oppressive atmosphere above, this room felt strangely peaceful. Light filtered from an unknown source, illuminating walls covered in detailed murals, depicting the forest through changing seasons. In the center of the room stood a simple wooden pedestal holding a leather-bound journal. Open to its final entry, the handwriting was unmistakably modern. "I've traced my family history to one of the original settlers. The dreams led me here, the church that shouldn't exist. I understand now why my grandmother warned me never to hike these woods alone. The entity they called the Watcher is real, but it's no god. It's trapped and growing desperate. The Guardian line has failed. The Dean heir must be found before the door opens completely." The entry was signed Ellie Palmer and dated just 3 days ago. Samuel flipped through earlier pages, finding meticulously researched genealogies connecting the Palmer family to the original settlers. Ellie hadn't stumbled upon the church by accident. She'd been searching for it, drawn by the same connection that had eventually pulled Samuel here. A smaller, folded paper fell from between the pages, a hand-drawn map of the church's interior showing passages and chambers not yet discovered, including one marked binding room beyond the chapel. On the reverse was a hastily scrawled note. "If found, I've gone to the binding room to reinforce the seal. The Watcher cannot be destroyed, only contained. Without a dean, the binding weakens. I've left signs for the heir to follow. If you're reading this, and your name is Dean, you're our only hope." The rosary pulled insistently now, pointing toward a narrow doorway concealed behind a tapestry depicting a forest clearing. As Samuel approached, he heard a faint voice, human, female, reciting what sounded like a prayer or incantation. Ellie Palmer was alive, just as the entity had said. but the footsteps had resumed above, heavier and more purposeful. Whatever watched over this place was converging on the chapel. Samuel had minutes at most before it found them both. The rosary beads clicked against each other without being touched, forming a pattern like Morse code. Samuel listened carefully, recognizing after a moment that the clicks formed words. "Hurry, door, weakens." Samuel pushed aside the tapestry, revealing a narrow stone passage. Ellie's voice grew clearer, rhythmic, determined, repeating phrases in what sounded like Latin, mixed with something older. The rosary pulled him forward, beads clicking faster against one another, as if sensing urgency. The passage opened into a perfectly circular chamber with a domed ceiling. At its center stood Ellie Palmer, alive but changed. The vibrant hiker from the missing person's photo was now gaunt, her eyes sunken with exhaustion. She stood within a complex pattern of symbols drawn on the stone floor in what looked disturbingly like blood. She faltered mid-incantation as Samuel entered, her eyes widening. "Dean? You're Samuel Dean?" Samuel approached cautiously, stopping at the edge of the symbol pattern. "Forest Service. I've been looking for you." A bitter laugh escaped her. "No, you've been called like I was." Her gaze traveled to the rosary in his hand. "You found my beacon. What are you doing, Ellie?" Samuel asked, gesturing to the blood symbols. "Buying time." Sweat beaded her forehead despite the chamber's chill. "The binding weakens without a guardian. I've been reinforcing it, but—" She swayed slightly, steadying herself against a stone pillar. "It's breaking through. Only Dean blood can renew the seal completely." Heavy footsteps echoed from the passage behind them, closer now. Something scraped against stone, the sound of something too large navigating the narrow corridor. "We need to get out of here," Samuel said, ranger training asserting itself. "I can lead us back to the surface." Ellie shook her head sharply. "There's no escape. The church exists in a fold between worlds, a pocket created by the original binding. We can't leave until the Guardian renews the seal, or until the Watcher breaks free completely." She gestured toward an alcove carved into the chamber wall. "The confession booth. It's waiting for you." Samuel approached the alcove cautiously. Unlike a traditional church confessional, this was a single seat facing a blank stone wall. Above it hung a bronze mask fashioned into a face both serene and terrible, eyes closed, mouth open in what might be ecstasy or agony. "What is this?" Samuel asked, though something in him already knew. "The Watcher feeds on confession, on guilt, shame, and regret," Ellie explained, her voice weakening. "Your ancestors created this interface to communicate with it, to feed it what it needs while maintaining the boundary." The footsteps halted just outside the chamber. A presence filled the passage, waiting, listening. "I can't hold it back any longer," Ellie whispered, blood dripping from her nose with the strain of maintaining the temporary binding. "You must confess, Dean. Take up your family's burden." Against all rational judgment, Samuel seated himself in the confession booth. The moment he did, the bronze mask's eyes opened, revealing mirrors that reflected Samuel's own face, distorted and aged. "Speak," whispered a voice from the mask's open mouth. "Confess your deepest shame, Guardian." Images flooded Samuel's mind unbidden. Caroline's face the morning of her accident, their argument about his refusal to leave the ranger service, her tearful departure in the storm, his last words to her. "The forest needs me more than you do. I told Caroline I chose the forest over her," Samuel whispered, the admission burning his throat. "She died thinking I didn't love her enough." The mask's eyes flared with hungry light. "More," it demanded. "I've blamed my father for abandoning us, but I abandoned my own son just the same. Different method, same result. I stay away because Michael reminds me of everything I lost, everything I failed to protect." With each confession, the air in the chamber grew heavier, charged with energy that flowed toward the mask. Behind Samuel, Ellie gasped. "It's working," she managed. "Keep going." But Samuel hesitated, suddenly understanding. "This is how it feeds, how it gains power." The mask's expression shifted subtly, hunger replacing serenity. "Complete the confession, Guardian." Take up your rightful place." In that moment, Samuel saw the pattern with perfect clarity. For generations, his family had fed this entity their shame and guilt, strengthening it while believing they contained it. The confession booth wasn't a tool for binding the Watcher, it was a conduit for its influence. He stood abruptly, turning to Ellie. "This isn't the way. We're not containing it, we're feeding it." The chamber shuddered violently. Stone cracked along the ceiling as something massive pressed against the boundaries of the space itself. "You don't understand," Ellie pleaded, blood now streaming from her eyes as well as her nose. "The confession renews the covenant. Without it, the passage entrance exploded inward, showering the chamber with stone fragments. In the dust and darkness beyond stood a towering figure of shadow and substance, its proportions wrong in ways that hurt to perceive. "He walks among us," Ellie whispered, collapsing to her knees within the blood symbols. The Watcher had arrived. The Watcher's presence filled the chamber, darkness given form. It moved like liquid shadow, limbs elongating and retracting with uncanny fluidity. Where its face should be, only deeper darkness swirled, occasionally parting to reveal something ancient and hungry beneath. Samuel pulled Ellie behind him, backing toward the farthest wall. His ranger training had prepared him for bears, cougars, even armed criminals. Not this. Yet protection instincts ran deeper than fear. "Stay behind me," he ordered, mind racing for a solution. The entity advanced slowly, savoring their fear. As it passed through Ellie's blood symbols, the patterns ignited briefly before fading to ash. The binding was broken completely. "Guardian," it spoke, voice like stones grinding against each other. "The prodigal returns." Samuel's hand closed around his knife, a futile gesture, but the weight of steel provided cold comfort. "I'm not your guardian. Whatever deal my ancestors made, it died with them." The Watcher's laughter shook dust from the ceiling. "Blood oaths transcend death, Samuel Dean. Your great-grandfather understood sacrifice for prosperity. Your father understood the price of defiance." It gestured with an impossibly long arm, and the chamber walls rippled like water. Images appeared. The Dean family through generations, receiving honors, amassing wealth, surviving disasters that claimed others. Then darker images, competitors failing, rivals suffering accidents, obstacles vanishing through unlikely circumstances. "The covenant benefits," the Watcher intoned. "And the cost." The images shifted to show David Dean's final moments, not the heart attack Samuel had been told about, but a deliberate sacrifice in this very chamber. His father kneeling before the confession mask, offering himself to spare his son. The revelation staggered Samuel. "You're lying." "The Watcher cannot lie," Ellie whispered behind him. "Only manipulate truth." The entity continued its advance, the chamber growing colder with each step. Dawn approaches above. My time in physical form wanes with the night. Choose, Guardian. Renew the covenant, or watch all you love suffer its dissolution. An idea formed in Samuel's mind, a desperate gambit. Dawn? Then we just need to survive until morning. Grabbing Ellie's arm, he pulled her toward a small side passage, barely visible in the chamber's gloom. The Watcher hissed in anger, shadows lashing out like whips, but Samuel had spent decades navigating dense forest in poor conditions. He dodged instinctively, dragging Ellie into the narrow corridor before the entity could regroup. It moves slower in confined spaces, Ellie gasped as they ran. Its form is most powerful in open chambers, with high ceilings. The passage climbed steeply upward, rough stone steps worn smooth by centuries of use. Behind them, shadows boiled at the corridor entrance as the Watcher contorted its massive form to follow. Does it always disappear at dawn? Samuel asked between labored breaths. Ellie nodded. Its physical manifestation requires darkness. During daylight, it exists only as influence, voice, and memory. They emerged into what appeared to be the church's main floor, though significantly changed. The orderly pews were now scattered like kindling, windows shattered, walls cracked from foundation to ceiling. The entire structure groaned, timbers creaking as if enduring a powerful storm. Pale light filtered through the broken windows, the first hint of approaching dawn. Samuel oriented himself quickly, identifying the main entrance across the devastated sanctuary. "This way," he directed, but Ellie pulled back. "We can't leave the church grounds," she warned. "Not while the boundary fails. It's the only thing keeping the Watcher contained to this valley." Shadows erupted from the passage behind them, reforming into the Watcher's towering form. It moved more awkwardly now, its fluid grace hampered by the growing light and confined space. "Clever prey," it growled. "But the sun merely leashes me. It does not defeat me." Samuel scanned the debris-filled sanctuary, seeking any advantage. Near the shattered altar, something caught his eye, a small clay pot, somehow intact amid the destruction. Inside grew a cluster of white flowers unlike any he'd seen in the Oregon wilderness, their petals faintly luminescent even in the growing dawn light. He lunged for the pot as the Watcher surged forward. The moment his fingers touched the cool clay, the flowers blazed with brilliant light. The entity recoiled, shadows smoking where the radiance touched them. "St. John's tears," Ellie breathed in recognition. The original binding used them. Flowers that bloom only in light touched by both worlds. Samuel lifted the pot, directing its light toward the Watcher. The entity retreated, shadows compressing into a more human-sized form. "A temporary reprieve," it snarled, voice weakening as dawn strengthened. The flowers die when plucked. Their light fades within hours. Already the blossoms were wilting slightly, their glow dimming. Samuel backed toward the church entrance, Ellie beside him, keeping the flowers between them and the entity. "We have until sunset," Samuel said grimly. "We need to find a more permanent solution." The first direct ray of sunlight pierced through the broken stained glass, striking the Watcher. Its form dissolved, with a sound like 1,000 voices screaming in unison, fading to nothing more than a darker patch of shadow in the corner of the ruined church. The threat had receded, but Samuel knew with bone-deep certainty it would return with the night. Morning sunlight streamed through the shattered church windows, illuminating dust particles that danced like miniature galaxies. Samuel surveyed the destruction. Splintered pews, cracked floors, walls that leaned at impossible angles, yet somehow remained standing. The entire structure seemed to exist in defiance of physical laws. "What happened here?" he asked, gesturing at the devastation. Ellie sank onto a broken pew, exhaustion etched in every line of her face. Blood had dried beneath her nose and eyes, stark against her pale skin. Reality fractures when the binding weakens. The church is the boundary between worlds. As it fails, so does the separation. Samuel checked his watch, 7:14 a.m. They had perhaps 12 hours before sunset. "We need to contact the outside." "Get help!" Ellie's bitter laugh held no humor. "There is no outside help for this, Ranger. The only people who understood the binding are long dead, except for fragments I've pieced together through research. Then we need to evacuate the area. If this thing breaks free, it won't leave the valley," Ellie interrupted. "The original 7 families chose this location specifically because the mountains create a natural containment. But anyone within 20 miles would be at risk," Samuel calculated quickly. The nearest town, Oak Ridge, lay 17 miles west. Over 5,000 people. He tried his radio again, still dead. His cell phone likewise showed no signal. All modern technology seemed useless within the church's influence. "There must be some way to communicate," Samuel insisted, Ranger pragmatism asserting itself. "The original Guardians would have needed contact with the outside world," Ellie considered this. "The pastor's study. If anything survived, it would be there." They made their way through debris to the small office Samuel had explored the previous evening. Daylight revealed details missed before. Photographs of stern-faced men spanning decades, all bearing the clerical collar, many with familiar Dean features. "Your family maintained the pastoral line as well as the guardianship," Ellie explained. "Double protection." Samuel examined the room methodically, testing floorboards, checking behind bookshelves. His Ranger training in search operations serving him well. Behind a tilted painting of the church's exterior, he discovered a small door built into the wall. Inside the hidden compartment sat an antique telephone, brass and polished wood with a hand crank on its side. The rotary dial gleamed as if recently polished, though everything else in the room was coated with dust. "It can't possibly work," Samuel said, lifting the heavy receiver out of habit rather than hope. To his shock, a dial tone hummed from the earpiece. Ellie stared in disbelief. The Watcher allowed communication when it served the Covenant. One call out, usually to summon the next Guardian when needed. Samuel's fingers hovered over the rotary dial. One call, who would believe him? Who could help? The answer came with painful clarity. There was only one person connected enough to this place to possibly understand. He dialed his son's cell number from memory, each rotary click echoing loudly in the quiet office. The line connected after a single ring. Hello. Michael's voice sounded exactly as it had 3 years ago, the last time they'd spoken, after another bitter argument about Samuel's refusal to retire. "Michael!" Samuel's voice caught unexpectedly. "It's Dad," a long pause. "Dad, where are you calling from? This number shows up as restricted." "I'm in the Eastern Forest Quadrant," Samuel began, unsure how much to reveal. "There's an emergency situation developing. Are you hurt?" Immediate concern replaced the initial wariness. "I'm fine, but I need you to do something without asking questions. Contact the Oak Ridge Sheriff. Tell them to prepare for possible evacuation." "Tell them," Samuel faltered, aware of how it would sound. "Tell them what?" Michael pressed. "Tell them there's an imminent environmental hazard in the Eastern Valley. Possible toxic release from an old, undocumented structure." It wasn't entirely a lie. Static crackled across the line, words breaking apart. "The connection was failing." "Dad, you're not making sense. Ruth said you never checked in last night. Search teams are already looking for you." "Listen carefully," Samuel said urgently. "There's a church in the deep eastern woods. It's not on any map. Our family is connected to it somehow. Ask Ruth about the old settlement stories. More static." Michael's voice faded in and out. "Sounds crazy. Need help coming to find—" "No," Samuel shouted. "Stay away from here. Just get the authorities to evacuate Oak Ridge by nightfall." The line went completely silent. Then a different voice emerged from the receiver. Not Michael, but a whispering chorus that Samuel recognized from the crypt below. "The Guardian calls for help," the voices mocked. "But only blood can help blood." Samuel slammed the receiver down, turning to find Ellie watching him with a mixture of sympathy and fear. "It let you call," she said quietly. "It wants him here too." The realization struck with horrifying clarity. The Watcher didn't just want a Guardian. It wanted all remaining Dean blood in one place. The antique telephone began to ring, its bell echoing through the destroyed church like a death knell. The telephone rang 3 times before falling silent, its abrupt cessation more disturbing than the sound itself. Samuel stared at the antique device, understanding now that everything in this church served the Watcher's purpose, even apparent means of escape or communication. "It's playing with us," he said grimly. Ellie nodded, her expression haunted. "The Watcher enjoys manipulation. Fear and hope are just different tools it uses." Samuel turned his attention to their immediate situation. "We have daylight hours before it returns. Tell me everything you've learned about this place." Ellie reached into her tattered backpack, retrieving a worn leather notebook filled with meticulous notes. "I've been researching the church for years. My grandmother had stories passed down through generations, warnings about these woods." She flipped to a page containing a rough sketch of the church. "There's more to this building than what's visible. The original structure was designed with multiple hidden passages and chambers. For what purpose?" Samuel asked. "Escape routes, primarily. The early Guardians weren't all willing participants. Some tried to flee." Her finger traced lines on the diagram. "These passages supposedly lead to different parts of the valley. If we could find one intact," Samuel considered this, "we'd still be within the containment area, but we might find resources or a way to contact help without the Watcher's interference." They began a systematic search of the church's main floor. looking for signs of hidden doorways or mechanisms. Samuel's ranger training proved valuable, his eye for ground disturbance and structural anomalies helping identify several possibilities. Behind the baptismal font, they discovered a loose stone panel. Samuel pressed it experimentally, and with a grinding sound, a section of the wall slid aside, revealing a narrow passage. "Stay close," he instructed, retrieving the pot of St. John's tears flowers. Though wilting, they still emitted a soft luminescence that lit their way better than his flashlight had the previous night. The passage descended gradually, curving in what Samuel estimated was a northeasterly direction. Unlike the supernatural spaces they'd encountered before, this tunnel felt distinctly human-made, roughly hewn stone with visible tool marks. Wooden support beams aged but solid. The regular rules of space seemed to apply here, Ellie observed, running her hand along the wall. No impossible architecture. After several minutes of careful progress, the passage opened into a small chamber. At its center stood a weathered wooden desk, covered with rolled parchments. The walls were lined with shelves containing dozens of leather-bound volumes and architectural tools. An architect's workshop, Samuel mused, examining the space. Someone designed this church very deliberately. He unrolled the largest parchment across the desk, revealing detailed blueprints of the church structure. Unlike modern architectural drawings, these incorporated strange symbols and notations in the margins, blending practical construction with what appeared to be ritual elements. "The original plans," Ellie breathed, leaning closer. "I've only seen fragments described in historical accounts." Samuel studied the blueprints with growing understanding. The church hadn't been built to contain the Watcher. It had been designed to harness its power while providing the illusion of containment. The Dean family hadn't been guardians. They'd been facilitators. "My ancestors weren't heroes," Samuel said quietly. "They were using this entity for their own benefit, channeling its influence while pretending to contain it." The blueprints revealed an intricate network of passages connecting various chambers, most converging on a central space labeled simply as the heart. According to the design, this chamber lay directly beneath the altar, deeper than the crypt they'd already explored. "There's another level we haven't seen," Samuel noted. Tracing the path with his finger, Ellie pointed to notations along the margins. These passages were designed to amplify or direct the Watcher's influence to specific locations in the valley. "Your ancestors could essentially target its power." Samuel felt sick. His family legacy wasn't protection or sacrifice, it was exploitation and deception. They'd built a supernatural weapon and disguised it as a sacred duty. He rolled up the blueprints, securing them with a leather strap. "We need to find this heart chamber. If the church was designed to direct the Watcher's power, maybe it can also truly contain it." As they prepared to continue their exploration, Samuel noticed something tucked beneath the desk, a small wooden box inlaid with mother of pearl in a pattern matching the church's stained glass. Windows, inside lay a brass pocket watch unlike any he'd seen before. Its face contained not just hour and minute hands, but additional dials showing lunar phases, planetary alignments, and a counter labeled thinning. Currently, this final dial pointed to critical, a Watcher's timepiece, Ellie explained, voice hushed with recognition. The Guardians used these to track when the boundary between worlds was at its weakest. According to my research, there were only 3 ever made. Samuel checked the current reading. All indicators aligned at positions marked in red, a warning configuration. "It's saying the boundary fails completely at sunset today," he translated, the Watcher's purpose becoming intuitively clear. "We're running out of time." The Watcher's timepiece ticked with unnatural precision, each movement accompanied by a sound too deep for its size. Samuel pocketed it, the weight against his thigh, a constant reminder of their dwindling time. "We need to find this heart chamber," he said, studying the blueprints one last time before rolling them up. Ellie nodded, but hesitation flickered across her face, a subtle tell that Samuel's years of interviewing witnesses immediately caught. "You're holding something back," he stated. Not a question. She sighed, shoulders slumping slightly. "I haven't been entirely forthcoming about why I came here. I gathered that. The journal entries, your research, this wasn't a hiking trip that went wrong. No." Ellie reached into her backpack again, this time extracting a small digital video camera. "I documented everything. My investigation, my discoveries, even my encounter with the Watcher. The camera's display was cracked but functional." Ellie's hands trembled slightly as she navigated to the first recorded file. The video began shakily, showing Ellie in her apartment surrounded by books, maps, and genealogical charts. Her appearance was healthier than now, face fuller, eyes brighter with determination rather than fear. "Day 1 of field research," recorded Ellie spoke to the camera. "After 3 years tracking disappearances in the Eastern Valley, I've confirmed my family connection to the original settlement. The Palmer line was one of the 7 founding families who made the covenant." Samuel watched as the video journal chronicled Ellie's methodical investigation, interviews with distant relatives, archive searches night after night, poring over historical records and topographical maps. "My grandmother's warnings weren't superstition," another entry stated. "The Palmer family was tasked with record-keeping for the covenant. When the Dean-Guardian line faltered in the 1960s, my grandfather attempted to maintain the boundary, but lacked the blood right. 23 people disappeared that year. The footage jumped to Ellie hiking through familiar forest, narrating her search pattern. Day 4 in the Eastern Quadrant. Compass malfunctions increasing. Bird and insect activity dropping to 0. All signs from the historical accounts that I'm approaching the fold in reality." Then came footage of her first glimpse of the church, the same awe and disbelief Samuel had. Experienced reflected in her documented reaction. "I found it," she whispered in the recording, camera shaking as it captured the impossible structure. The Church of the Watcher. Samuel fast-forwarded through her initial exploration, which mirrored his own in many ways. He slowed the playback when the footage showed Ellie discovering documents in the pastor's study. "The covenant was a lie," recorded Ellie's voice shook with anger. "The 7 families didn't contain anything. They channeled it. The Watcher granted prosperity, long life, success. But the price was feeding it the suffering of others. Confession became sacrifice. The Dean family directed its power like a weapon against rivals, against anyone who threatened their interests." The next footage was darker, shot at night in the church's main sanctuary. Candles lit themselves as Ellie walked the aisle. The camera captured a tall shadow stretching across the wall, impossibly elongated, moving independent of any light source. "It's here," Ellie whispered in the recording. "God help me, it's real." The shadow spoke, its voice distorting the camera's microphone. "Palmer blood returns." "Where is the Dean?" "Where is my guardian?" "There are no more guardians," recorded Ellie replied, her voice steadier than Samuel would have expected. "The covenant is broken. Blood oaths do not break," the shadow responded. "Dean blood lives. I taste it on the wind. You will bring him to me, and if I don't..." The shadow expanded, darkness flowing like liquid across walls and ceiling. Then the door opens completely. What was contained by choice will be unleashed by force. The video abruptly cut to Ellie's face, recording a message in the crypt below. Blood trickled from her nose, her complexion grey with exhaustion. "If you're watching this, you've found my camera. My name is Ellie Palmer. I've been attempting to reinforce the boundary, but it's failing. Only Dean blood can truly restore it. There is a living descendant, a forest ranger named Samuel Dean. Find him. The Watcher must remain contained." Her eyes shifted, looking at something off-camera. "It's getting stronger. I've found references to an original binding ritual in the heart chamber. I'm going to try..." The video cut off as something dark surged across the frame. Samuel lowered the camera, meeting Ellie's gaze. "You came here deliberately to find me." "Not exactly," she replied. "I came to investigate my family's connection. Finding you was the Watcher's goal, not mine. But when I learned the truth, how dangerous this entity truly is, I knew we needed the Dean bloodline to continue the exploitation." Samuel challenged. To end it, Ellie countered. The original ritual wasn't about channeling power. It was a true containment. Your ancestors corrupted it for their benefit. With the right knowledge and the right blood, we could restore the proper binding. The timepiece in Samuel's pocket ticked louder, the sound resonating through the small chamber as if counting down to something inevitable. Following the church blueprints, Samuel and Ellie navigated deeper into the network of hidden passages. The architectural precision gradually gave way to something older, rough-hewn tunnels that predated the church itself, with walls bearing primitive symbols carved directly into living stone. The settlers didn't build these, Samuel observed, tracing a spiral pattern that matched markings he'd seen throughout the church. They found them, like the Watcher, Ellie agreed. They discovered something ancient and tried to harness it. The tunnels descended in a counterclockwise spiral, each complete circuit bringing them deeper beneath the church. The air grew increasingly dense, carrying a metallic taste like ozone before a lightning strike. The luminescent flowers in Samuel's pot dimmed with each level they descended, their protective light fading. "We're approaching the heart," Ellie whispered, her voice carrying strange harmonics in the thickened air. The spiral path ended at a perfectly circular doorway, carved from a single massive stone. No hinges or mechanisms were visible, yet it stood partially ajar, as if recently used. Beyond lay darkness more complete than mere absence of light, a consuming void that seemed to absorb the dying glow of the flowers. Samuel hesitated at the threshold. Every ranger instinct warned against entering, yet the Watcher's timepiece in his pocket ticked with increasing urgency. They were running out of options and time. "Together," he said, reaching for Ellie's hand. They stepped through the doorway into the heart chamber. For a moment, sensory deprivation was total. No light, no sound, not even the feeling of solid ground beneath their feet. Then, as if responding to their presence, a faint illumination bloomed from the center of the chamber. The light emanated from an ancient stone table, its surface inscribed with the same spiral pattern that had guided their descent. Upon it lay a massive leather-bound tome, its cover made from some unidentifiable hide that seemed to shift and move in the peripheral vision. "The Codex Umbra," Ellie breathed, recognition and awe in her voice. "I thought it was just a legend, the original text containing the true binding ritual." Samuel approached cautiously. Unlike everything else in the church, the book bore no dust, no signs of age. It looked as if it had been created moments before their arrival, the leather still supple, the pages crisp. As his hands hovered above it, the cover opened of its own accord. Pages turned by unseen force, settling on a section written in multiple languages, some recognizable as Latin and Greek, others completely alien, composed of symbols that seemed to crawl across the page. "Can you read it?" he asked Ellie. "Parts," she replied, leaning closer. "My research included some of these symbols. It describes the original binding, not a covenant or deal, but a true containment ritual performed before European settlement." She traced the text without touching it. "Indigenous peoples discovered the Watcher centuries ago. They understood its nature better than the settlers, saw it as a corruption to be contained rather than a power to be used." "How did they bind it?" "Through sacrifice," Ellie said grimly. "Not of others, but of self. Willing blood freely given by 7 individuals to create a 7-fold seal." The implications settled heavily. "The 7 families, yes, but they perverted the ritual. Instead of sacrifice for containment, they offered the blood of others to feed it, while maintaining just enough of a binding to direct its power." Ellie looked up, her expression resolute. "The true ritual requires Dean blood. The bloodline that opened the door must be the one to close it." Samuel stared at the ancient text, the responsibility of generations weighing on him. "What exactly would this ritual entail?" Before Ellie could answer, the Codex's pages turned again, revealing detailed diagrams of the heart chamber. 7 points were marked around the central table, each corresponding to a cardinal direction plus zenith, nadir, and center. The ritual requires 7 points of power, Ellie interpreted. In the original binding, 7 different bloodlines provided the sacrifice. But the text suggests that in cases of a broken seal, the bloodline responsible can repair it alone. One person at all 7 points? That's impossible. Not one person, Ellie corrected. One bloodline. You and your son. The truth clicked into place with terrible clarity. That's why the Watcher let me call Michael. It needs us both here. Yes, but not for the reason it thinks. Ellie's eyes gleamed with desperate hope. The Watcher believes it needs Dean blood to renew the corrupt covenant. It doesn't understand that you could use the same blood to imprison it completely. The Codex turned to a final page, revealing a ritual circle identical to the chamber floor beneath their feet. At its center was an illustration of a simple clay bowl, unremarkable except for the spiral pattern matching the one throughout the church. The bowl of binding, Ellie identified. The focal point for the ritual. According to the text, it should be here, but... She gestured at the empty stone table. Samuel surveyed the chamber again, ranger training asserting itself. Someone's been here recently. There are scuff marks on the floor, disturbed dust patterns. The Watcher may have hidden it, Ellie suggested. Or perhaps your father. A memory surfaced. David Dean's warning about coming back, about offering himself. Perhaps his final act had been to conceal the means of true binding. The timepiece in Samuel's pocket chimed, a clear, resonant tone that filled the chamber. Checking it, Samuel saw all hands aligned at the position marked preparation. Sunset was 3 hours away. The search for the bowl of binding led them back through the labyrinth of passages, checking alcoves and hidden chambers marked on the blueprints. Samuel worked methodically, his ranger training perfectly suited for the systematic search of difficult terrain. Ellie's academic knowledge complemented his practical skills, together identifying promising locations based on ritual significance. The bowl would be hidden somewhere accessible, but not obvious. Ellie reasoned as they emerged into the main church again. Somewhere your father could reach, but the Watcher wouldn't think to look. Samuel surveyed the ruined sanctuary, considering his father's mindset. He would hide it in plain sight, something that looked ordinary. His gaze settled on the baptismal font near the altar, a simple stone basin mounted on a pedestal, unremarkable except for the spiral pattern carved subtly around its rim, nearly invisible beneath decades of candle soot and dust. There, he said with sudden certainty. The font's basin lifted easily from its pedestal, revealing a hollow space beneath. Inside rested an ancient clay bowl, its surface etched with the now familiar spiral that appeared throughout the church. As Samuel lifted it, the bowl felt unnaturally heavy for its size, as if containing more than just empty space. The spiral pattern seemed to move slightly when viewed from the corner of his eye, creating an unsettling sensation of depth beyond the physical dimensions. The bowl of binding, Ellie confirmed, reverent. Your father hid it perfectly. The Watcher would never suspect the true binding tool was disguised as part of the corrupted church. The timepiece chimed again, 2 hours until sunset. Outside, the quality of light had already changed, taking on the golden hue of late afternoon. Shadows lengthened across the sanctuary floor, and with them came a subtle darkening in the corners of the room, a thickening of the air that signaled the Watcher's growing influence as day waned. "We need to prepare the ritual," Ellie said, her voice steady despite the fear evident in her eyes. The Codex described 7 points that must be marked with Dean blood. Without your son, you'll need to visit each position sequentially. Samuel placed the bowl on the altar. And what happens when the ritual is complete? Ellie hesitated. The texts weren't entirely clear. The binding creates a one-way barrier. What's inside stays inside, including whoever completes the ritual, Samuel finished, the implication clear. His father's sacrifice took on new meaning, not just buying time, but attempting the true binding alone and failing without the necessary bloodline strength. Before Ellie could respond, the church doors burst open. Michael Dean stood in the entrance, backlit by the setting sun, his ranger uniform marking him instantly as Samuel's son despite the years of separation. "Dad?" Michael called, disbelief coloring his voice as he took in the ruined church. "What the hell is this place?" Samuel moved toward his son, relief and dread warring within him. "Michael, you shouldn't have come. It's not safe. Not safe? The entire ranger station is searching for you." Michael entered cautiously, surveying the impossible architecture with growing confusion. "Ruth started talking about old legends after your call. When the search teams reported compass malfunctions and electronic failures in the eastern quadrant, I decided to check myself." His ranger training was evident in his systematic sweep of the space, categorizing threats and exits. The family resemblance struck Samuel forcefully. 3 generations of Dean men now connected to this cursed place. "You need to leave," Samuel insisted. "Now before sunset." Michael's expression hardened, the same stubborn set of jaw that Samuel saw in his own mirror. "Not without you. Whatever's happening here." His words cut off as he noticed the shadows behind Samuel and Ellie moving independently, coalescing into a vaguely humanoid shape. "Hello, Michael," spoke the Watcher, its voice carrying the familiar timbre of David Dean. "The last of the bloodline returns. The circle completes." Samuel pulled his hunting knife, the only weapon he carried. Its silver blade gleamed as he stepped between the entity and his son. "Stay back. It uses familiar voices, familiar faces. Don't trust what you see?" The Watcher laughed, the sound reverberating through the church's wooden beams. "Such protection, such fatherly concern. Yet you abandoned him, just as your father abandoned you." The shadows expanded, filling the sanctuary with writhing darkness despite the remaining daylight. The entity was growing stronger, the boundary between worlds thinning as sunset approached. From his pocket, Samuel withdrew another object he'd found beside the bowl of binding, a ceremonial dagger with a blade of obsidian, its handle wrapped in leather darkened by old bloodstains. The Dean family sacrificial knife, used for generations to seal and renew the corrupt covenant. "I know what you are now," Samuel addressed the entity directly. "Not a god or demon, just a parasite that feeds on fear and guilt. My ancestors didn't contain you, they enabled you." The Watcher's form solidified further, features resolving into a perfect replica of David Dean, as Samuel remembered him. "They understood exchange, Samuel. Power requires sacrifice. The binding renewed requires Dean blood, freely given or forcibly taken." Shadows lashed out like tendrils, one wrapping around Michael's ankle before he could retreat. Another seized Ellie, lifting her from the ground as she cried out in pain. "Choose, Guardian," the entity demanded. "The ritual begins with or without your cooperation." Time seemed to slow as Samuel assessed the situation with ranger clarity. The Watcher held Ellie and Michael in shadow tendrils, the entity's form growing more substantial as sunset approached. The bowl of binding sat on the altar waiting. The ceremonial dagger felt heavy in his hand, an object stained with generations of manipulation and false sacrifice. "Let them go," Samuel demanded. "This is between you and me, between you and the Dean bloodline." The Watcher's approximation of his father's face smiled without warmth. "The ritual requires blood. The covenant demands sacrifice." "The covenant was a lie," Samuel countered, stepping forward. "My ancestors didn't contain you, they fed you. They used you. And in return, you granted wealth, protection, power." He moved deliberately toward the altar, keeping the entity's attention on him. "I understand now. You're trapped here just as much as we are. You need the Dean blood to maintain your connection to this world." The Watcher's form flickered, shadows roiling with increasing agitation. "I am beyond your comprehension, Guardian. I existed before your bloodline, before human feet touched this continent. Yet you need us," Samuel pressed, recognizing the defensive reaction. "The original binding trapped you here. My ancestors found a way to exploit that binding for mutual benefit, feeding you confessions and guilt in exchange for your influence." He placed the bowl of binding at the center of the altar, precisely where the blueprints had indicated. But the true ritual, the one performed by those who came before the settlers, that was meant to seal you away completely. The shadow tendrils tightened around Ellie and Michael, drawing pained gasps from both. Outside, the sun touched the horizon. The timepiece in Samuel's pocket chimed a final warning. "The covenant renews now," the watcher hissed. "Or they die." Samuel locked eyes with Michael, seeing fear, but also the same determination that had driven 3 generations of Dean men. Without words, something passed between them: understanding, forgiveness, resolve. In that moment, Samuel made his choice. He raised the ceremonial dagger and drew it across his palm, letting blood pool in his cupped hand. "I offer my blood," he declared, his voice steady. "Freely given, not taken." He poured his blood into the bowl of binding. The spiral pattern etched into its surface began to glow with a cold blue light. "A single offering changes nothing," the watcher scoffed, though the shadows around it rippled with uncertainty. "You're right," Samuel agreed, moving to the first of the 7 points marked on the chamber floor. He knelt, pressing his bloodied hand to the stone. "The ritual requires 7 points, 7 offerings." The floor beneath his palm illuminated with the same blue light as the bowl. Samuel rose, moving to the 2nd position. The watcher's confidence faltered. "Stop this. The old ways are forgotten. The covenant was broken generations ago," Samuel interrupted, marking the 2nd point with his blood. Another section of the floor illuminated. "My father tried to tell me. He came back to attempt the true binding, but couldn't complete it alone. The entity's form destabilized further, shadows thrashing wildly. The tendrils holding Ellie suddenly released, as the watcher needed more strength to maintain its form. "Michael," Samuel called out, "the ritual needs both of us." Dean blood at all 7 points simultaneously. Understanding immediately, Michael broke free from the momentarily weakened shadow grip. He drew the ranger knife from his belt, slicing his own palm without hesitation. "Like this?" he asked, pressing his bloodied hand to the 3rd marker point. The blue light intensified, connecting the 3 activated points with lines of energy that converged on the bowl of binding. The watcher howled, a sound like wind through 1,000 broken windows. "The remaining points," Ellie gasped, finding her voice as she scrambled away from the thrashing shadows. "Quickly!" Samuel and Michael moved with coordinated precision, marking the 4th and 5th positions. The church structure groaned around them, timbers cracking as reality itself seemed to bend. The watcher abandoned David Dean's form entirely, reverting to a massive shadow that boiled across the ceiling and walls. "The binding will trap you all," it raged. "This chamber will become your tomb." "So be it," Samuel replied, meeting Michael's eyes across the ritual circle. In his son's face, he saw forgiveness for the years of absence, understanding of the legacy that had shaped their family's path. Together, father and son marked the 6th and 7th points simultaneously. The blue light completed its circuit, racing from point to point before converging on the bowl of binding in a pillar of radiance that pierced the church ceiling, shooting skyward as the sun disappeared completely below the horizon. The watcher's form was drawn inexorably toward the light, compressing, condensing, howling in ancient fury as it was pulled into the bowl of binding. The shadows throughout the church followed, sucked into the vortex of energy as the true ritual fulfilled its purpose. As suddenly as it began, the light vanished. The bowl of binding now contained only what appeared to be ordinary water, its surface perfectly still, despite the chaos moments before. The church creaked and settled. Outside, through shattered windows, stars appeared in a perfectly normal night sky. "Is it over?" Michael asked, breaking the silence. Samuel lifted the timepiece from his pocket. Its hands now pointed to sealed, the dial no longer ticking with urgent warning. "It's contained," he confirmed. Looking to Ellie for confirmation, she nodded, expression mixed with wonder and scholarly satisfaction. "The true binding. You did what the original 7 families should have done generations ago." Samuel approached the bowl of binding cautiously. Within its depths, he could occasionally glimpse a darker shadow moving beneath the water's surface, contained but not destroyed. "We need to ensure this stays sealed," he said. "No more guardians feeding it for power. No more corruption." Dawn broke over the eastern mountains, light streaming through the ruined church windows. For the first time since entering this place, Samuel felt the weight of his family's legacy lift from his shoulders. In his pocket, he found his ranger badge, somehow untouched by the supernatural events. He removed it, studying the shield that had defined his identity for 30 years. "I think I'm ready for that retirement you've been suggesting," he told Michael with the ghost of a smile. "But first, we have some family history to put in order.